Welcome to this webinar. We're really delighted by the response to this topic. So, of course, all of us now work in the media industry. We know the importance of data, but I think very often we find that our data is found in different silos. So this webinar today is to help address those issues on how to bring together all this data and make good sense of it. This webinar is part of a series of several other webinars, 8 other webinars actually that we have put together. We've got 6 webinars coming up on COVID data and public health data storytelling later this month in English and in Mandarin by our trainer in Malaysia, Kwang Peng Kweksa. And also in July, data privacy in managing subscriptions, what you need to know about protecting personal information. Now, of course, everybody here, I'm sure, has already put up their registration walls, and some are actively pursuing subscription strategies. And what do you do? And you run mailing lists as well, or WhatsApp groups and Telegram groups. What do you do with all this personal information? What are the rules surrounding it? We are looking at this not from a technical or legal perspective, but more from a practical perspective of how to manage all this information across teams as well. So that's coming up on 7th of July. This series of webinars is brought to you by the Google News Initiative. And for today's session, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Jakub Otrzasek, and he and his team from across, ranging from Australia, Singapore, and Kazakhstan are here today to introduce this topic to you. Over to you, Jakub.
Thank you, Junli. Hello, everyone. It's very nice to meet you. I'm Jakub, leading analytics and data at MightyHive. We've been a part of a couple of projects executed together with Google. There is a special arm of Google called Google News Initiative. And together with that arm, we worked recently on a project called Subscriptions Labs. And today we would like to take you through some findings and thinking which we developed during that project. MightyHive played a role of a technologist in that project, and we were responsible to set up data collection foundations. And I think that's where we will focus today. With me, the main presenters actually for this presentation today are Vasily, who is our data and analytics lead based in Singapore. We have Meruyert and Almas, who are based in Kazakhstan, and they will take you through the details of the Subscriptions Labs program. Now, before that, I wanted to quickly present MightyHive to you and our capabilities. So we are based all over in Asia and all over the planet. We can speak most of the Asian languages, and we can help you to grow your maturity in every region of the world. As I said, for a couple of last years, we worked closely with Google News initiatives, helping publishers to elevate their businesses. Vasily, if you can move to the next slide. So for those who are not that familiar with GNI, so it stands for Google News Initiative. As I said, it's an arm of Google, which is helping publishers to navigate through these tough times. We can say that there are 3 primary goals here. So it's elevating quality of journalism. So Google is helping you to build different solutions like data-driven journalism. There is also a lot around evolving business models and growing digital maturity of publishers, growing subscription streams or advertising streams of revenue. And finally, it also is empowering newsrooms with technology through tools like NCI or RCI, which are available for free for publishers, and they can be embedded to your organization just by going through Google News Initiative site and going through a couple of wizards. So moving to the next slide, most of the work today around GNI where MightyHive participates in is actually basing on a Deloitte playbook. You can use QR code to download that playbook. Here, the playbook basically has outlined 9 use cases in 3 streams. So reader engagement, which we see as a base to add any other movements here. So we have content planning, which basically means using techniques like RFV, which stands for recency, frequency, volume, finding out who are the most valuable readers you have and how to create more content that they like so you can grow that segment. Second thing is recirculation. So basically, how do we get our readers to click another article? So all sorts of content recommendations, engines, and tactics, which helps to promote more engagement with your site. And overall reader experience, which goes a little bit into a product development, A/B testing, and personalization. The second stream is all around subscriptions. So that's basically the stream which we executed, and we'll talk about this particular presentation, which is subscription pricing and promotion with a little bit of A/B testing. There is a big part of data work related to design for a leader LTV. So everything about the lifetime value of your readers, which can get combined with advertising revenue and subscriptions revenue. So it helps you to do more data-driven decisions, revenue diversification, and onboarding different revenue streams to your organization. And finally, we have revenue from advertising, so audience-based advertising. So how do you develop audiences? What do you do in a days or on the eve of death of third-party cookie? Pricing strategies, and finally optimization of your yield. These are sort of 9 use cases where either GNI or MightyHive is working on with publishers. Moving to the next slide. I wanted to recommend everyone a Playbook, which MightyHive developed together with Google News Initiative last year, almost at this time of the year. It is based on a Data Labs program where we worked on 3 of these use cases. So we featured our thinking about the content planning, recirculation, and inventory yield management. You can just click that QR code, you can download it. There is no forms, no PIIs or anything like that. So no one is going to chase you from a sales perspective, and no one is going to try to sell you anything. So you can download it hassle-free. Sharing is caring. To the next slide, please. Now I will pass to Vasily, who will actually take you through the nitty-gritty components of this project. Thank you very much, Vasily. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Jakub, and thanks everyone for taking your time and participating in this webinar. My name is Vasily, or Vas for short. I'm a data lead for MightyHive in Southeast Asia. I was main analytics lead on the project. I'm going to be taking you through some points of today's presentation. I'm going to speak about the objectives of this project, how we approach this project, who participated, what was the overall objective for it, and how we approach the data activation parts. Also, as Jakub mentioned, with us today, we have Almas and Meruyert, and they're going to be speaking on the technicals and the optimization part. So just to set up a little bit of scene, I'm coming from market research and sociology, so I've been working in data for quite some time. And a couple of years back, I started working in the digital analytics and had privilege to work in the GNI projects as well, or the projects related to the publisher space. And by the way, you've seen a couple of QR codes that Jakub shared on the previous slides. If you haven't had a chance to download these playbooks, maybe you're busy or anything, worry not, because we also have these QR codes in our last slides. We will be able to download those playbooks. All right, so starting with the project itself, I want to give a little bit of a general notion about recent but drastic changes that not only affect the publisher space, but also affect overall life of like humanity in general. It may sound like a little bit of stretch, but I think it's not. I have a picture of the Gutenberg press here on the right-hand side. It's one of the most important inventions that affected how information, knowledge are spread, and it eventually affected overall progress of humanity and our lifestyles. So what I want to say here is Gutenberg press and like the spread of the press, printed press in general, one of the biggest inventions in the human history. What we're experiencing right now, all of us at the moment, is another big step in how the information is spread. And it affects not only the publisher space, again, it affects all of our lives. And I'm definitely speaking about the digital changes here. So some of us or all of us are actually experiencing it at the moment. And people on the call here, some of you lead this change by being a publisher and by being in this digital space. What I wanted to emphasize here is it's not just a change from paper to digital. Again, it's a change of perception of the information and stories that are perceived by readers. So news and stories are becoming more like a patchwork these days. It's abundant, it's much more fast-paced, it's much diverse, there's tons of information around, and once this whole space is becoming more diversified, so as the ways of how readers perceive the information, right? So there are tons of opportunities into what stories you read, where you read them, what occasion, how do you structure your information perception, and so on. And that leads us to the reader space becoming much more diversified, much more segmented. And what we as publishers want to know, we want to know more about behavior of the readers in those segments, their preferences. And that's not just academic interest, obviously, it's also a business interest, because we want these people not just to engage with our news and information, but we also looking at it from the monetization perspective. So in overall, the background of this project is MightyHive in the subscription labs wanted to help publishers to better understand this diverse and complex picture of reader behavior, reader preferences, and answer to some questions that would help readers or publishers rather to provide better experience for readers, produce better content, and obviously engage and monetize on the readers base. And again, this is the underline of the project that we worked on. In the course of the project, we engaged with 8 publishers from different markets. What is the most exciting and the most challenging here is all of these publishers, they are not just coming from different countries and different backgrounds. They have their own business goals and business models. And they also different in terms of what technicals do they use at the moment, what stories do they produce, and where they are at the digital maturity, or rather like how do they actually act on the data right now, this digital space that I've been speaking for quite some time right now. So 8 publishers were selected here. You see publishers coming from Indonesia, Taiwan, India, Japan, and Cambodia as well. So when we engaged with these publishers, we tried to establish the most important business cases, business goals, and how these publishers approach all these things. So we engaged with the cohort with fact-finding sessions, and we wanted to make sure as a partner in this project that we're delivering the most relevant work to each of the publishers. So many questions that we heard from these publishers were related to how do they engage their readers, how do they build the right value proposition for specific segments of the readers, then how do they segment these readers. There was a bunch of questions related to monetization, therefore subscription labs, the subscription nature of this project. Also questions going further on like, once we obtain the subscribers, for example, how do we retain them? And all these questions somehow were related to the data points and the digital experience. So we wanted to approach the project from a holistic point. And answering those questions, those diversified questions that publishers had, it's a little bit more complex than just looking into your analytics software or your content management software or your subscribers management software. In our opinion and from our experience, it requires a solid framework on how these questions should be approached. And we presented the publishers with this framework. So the idea here is that you start with a definition of your business goals. So what is your immediate business need? Is it the growth of the subscriber base, or is it related more on improving what sort of content you produce, or is it something else? So we start with the business goal and business definition. We have a framework on how the most common business goals can be translated into the technical. So I'm going to take you through those goals and through more details on how it can be approached a little bit later in this presentation. But essentially, you start with this business goal, then you go down to the use cases. Use case means, so let's say if as a publisher, you think that monetization or growing your subscribers base is the most relevant, the most important objective for you, you would look into what sort of use cases, or rather how you should look at this data in the first place, can support your decision making here. So once you identified the business goal and the use cases, you'll go down a little bit deeper into the actual analysis practices. Okay, so let's say you're trying to grow your subscription base through some help of your newsletters. So you would need to build your analysis practices around like looking into how your newsletters perform, at what time of the day it performed the best, what sort of stories in the newsletter should be shared so it could lead to the subscriptions, and so on. Obviously, each of the publishers would have their own specifics, and they would come up with their own relevant analysis practices. All these practices is something that needs to be established on a regular basis. We also gonna speak about this in more details later in this presentations. But the next point that I want to emphasize, that all these things are not possible without establishing a proper data foundation. So if you don't have this data to make your decisions on, you simply won't be able to achieve your business goals, or like you will be right, but you won't be armed with these insights and the data points, and you may struggle, being honest. So the data collection foundations was the essential aim of this project. So MightyHive, as Jakub mentioned previously, was chosen as a technologist, and our primary role was in establishing this data foundations for publishers. So later on, they could go again through the structure from identifying the business goals to use cases to analysis practices and actually act upon this data. Again, what I want to emphasize here is our role, primary role, was a role of the technologist in this project. And we're going to be speaking about the complexity of the technical work as well. Almas has his part on it. We were not focusing on consulting that much as MightyHive, simply because there was a work that was done by FTI in Google in this space, primarily to us. However, we received quite a lot of different questions and requests from the publishers in terms of how the data can be utilized, right? So we established the data foundations. We're collecting something about their articles, a lot about their readers, paywalls, and so on. So how they can approach this data, this is what we received as a request from them. So how it can be used in the dashboards, how it can be used in Google Analytics, for example, and yada, yada, yada. So there is a definitely need for technical or analysis upskill for the publishers. And we also were privileged enough to provide some sort of advice and wear like an advisor or consultancy hat in this project by the end of it. But what I would like to again emphasize in my speech here is that we primarily worked on the establishing this data foundations, the data points, and again, without these data points, it's hard or even impossible for the publishers to make decisions in terms of monetization, content performance, retentions, and so on. Now I would like to speak a little bit about the approach or how we rolled out the project in general, having such a diverse cohort of the publishers in it with, again, their own specifics, their own business goals, and their own technicals. So there were a couple of steps that we've taken with these publishers. Again, I mentioned that at the beginning, we started with a fact-finding session. So we had a number of interviews with the publishers when we try to understand their business objectives and make sure that the work that we're delivering fits their cases. Then we conducted a technical audit where we wanted to answer to the question, do they actually collect any sort of data at this point? Then we came up with the collection plan based on this technical audit and their objectives. And a lot of time were spent on the technical implementation when we collaborated closely with publishers' technical teams in order to make sure that we're collecting the right data and it's flowing into Google Analytics. And Alma's gonna take you through this part. Also, we have a part on analysis and experimentation. We developed a playbook on the personalization, and we also advised the publishers on how to approach different cases, how to set up KPIs. Again, we're gonna be speaking about this later in this presentation. Yeah, but before we go into the technical implementation, I want to give you just a little bit of a glimpse on how we approach the framework in terms of like what, in our opinion or in our experience as the technical partner, publishers should like how should they start with the digitally driven approach. So the idea here is that you need to make sure that you're covering the cases related to your reader engagement before you move to the subscriber cases and to monetization cases. And then you can focus on retention of your subscribers base once these first two cases are sorted out. We're going to be providing more details about those cases and how they can be approached again a little bit further in this session. But what I want to put your attention to right now is that our approach to this project was to understand again what is the most relevant for a specific publisher on one hand. So let's say if a publisher is nascent in terms of digital maturity and they're not really using data at this point, we suggested them to start with the reader engagement first and then move towards conversion and monetization. So because it makes sense, I mean, if you focus on conversion and monetization before making sure that you're producing the right content, you may jeopardize your monetization processes. But on one hand, we try to approach it again in a custom way tailored for each specific publisher. But what I want to emphasize here is, on the other hand, we also made sure that all these points are covered within this project for the publishers with the work that we're doing. So even we're advising publisher X to start with the engagement, we make sure that we establish all the data points for conversion and monetization cases and for the retention cases. And with this note, I will pass my time to Almas, who is the technical lead for the project, and he will speak about the technicals of the work that we've done.
Yep, thank you, Vasily. I'm Almas, and I live in Astana. It is the capital of Kazakhstan, located in the middle of Eurasia. And I had a technical leading and engineering role in this project. So let's talk about our main goals on the next slide. The main goal of these technicals is to send information to Google Analytics in order to analyze data, to make some business decisions. And these pieces of data would be taken from your website, from your systems, in order to transfer it to Google Analytics and say what kind of pieces of information we would need if we want to analyze our articles, publish readers, etc. We definitely would need the article ID. Say if you want to know the most read article on your website, you will be able to sort these things on Google Analytics. And if we add content category to this, we would be able to fetch most popular articles within each category you have. Say you have business category, some news category, politics, etc. So the main point that I want to say is that the most power of these pieces of information is in combinations of them. That is why the more metadata we collect, the better and more powerful reports we could build out of that. That is why we need author name, time of publish, time since published, so that you may create some interesting reports. Say you have some crazy idea that if you would add 10% more articles about some articles with a sense of humor, and you add it to some say politics or business category, and you have an idea that this will improve your readers' retention. And there won't be problem for you after implementation of these technicals. You just need to say to your team to make more articles in this content category, and you may tag it with some humor tag with your article tags metadata, so that you could exclude this in a month or two when you'll be comparing different timestamps of these periods. Yeah, article interactions. It is the next stuff that we may collect. Usually when companies are using Google Analytics, they just track page views and switches between different pages. But we may also fetch information about such events like comments, when people leave some commentary on under your articles, or press social share buttons when they finish article reading. Also, you would be interested in reader definitions about whether they are subscribed or not, how much, how long they are subscribed, number of articles they read, etc. And reader actions, whether they are logged in or logged out, whether they have subscriptions, paid subscriptions or not, etc. Let's go to the next slide to see how this process is established between MightyHive and publishers. So in the first place, we need to, as MightyHive, we need to create solution design where we describe every pieces of information that we need you to pass us on the on the next step. Publisher sends us information from their websites, and there are many ways how to pass data to us. We on the top right corner, you see the diagram where on the top you see the website. So it means we may grab information directly from your website, like the name of the article, and we may just fetch this information from the title of the article. But there is another better option called data layer. It is like a separate box container of information of your website, and information to data layer may be sent directly from your backend systems, from your CRM, etc. And it would be much easier for us to fetch information from data layer. We fetch it from data layer, then push it to Google Analytics via Google Tag Manager. Why it is important and much preferable, because let's see on the next slide, on the example of some website, YouTube, you see NBC News is the element of your web page. And everything you see on your web page has its tags, elements, classes, IDs, etc. And if you fetch information directly from your web interface, it may work in the beginning, but say in 2 months or half a year, you decide to make a redesign and you changed classes, you changed elements, and this may break things if you tightly bound it to your user interface. And in other on the next slide, there is a other point that worth be mentioned is different types of realization of web pages. Say you may have single page applications or multi-page applications, or maybe accelerated mobile pages. They all have different ways of updating data on the web page itself, and it is always well, each website is different in the ways how you can fetch information out of them. And data layer is also a good point here, because data layer has the same structure on every web pages. And but anyway, of course, if you want to track some button clicks like buy now or read more buttons, you would probably be you'll have to bind some piece of code in your GTM to these buttons, and be tightened to this, and we may track it. Well, let me show you on the next slide how we may use this knowledge about our website structures and technicals. Say you have you want to track when user sees promotions or some elements on your website. Here, one of the example of our websites, we wanted to track paywall articles when user sees that, but due to the spam nature of the application of this website, we got this event even if user didn't see it on the page. It was triggered on the page load, and it could cause false positive or false negative decisions. On the next slide, we also see the next example of how to use technicals. Say you have an article and you want users and you want to track when user has read the article fully. The first option here, where you may track the visibility of the end of an article, say when, let's see on the next slide, in web browser we have such a name like a viewport. Viewport is everything that user sees currently. And the first option to track article reading when user scrolls down and reaches this end of article position, and we may trigger like article is read in that moment. But in this case, in this first option, we may miss such situations where users just scroll things down fast, especially when you have infinite articles. And the second option is to fetch how much words you have in this article. Say you have an article and there are about 2,000 words in that article, and via using simple math, dividing by average reading speed, you may find out that in order to read this article fully, average user needs about 5 minutes for reading it till the end. And by combining these two events, like this timer event, 5 minutes, and viewport location of the end of the article, you may trigger such an event, and you will definitely know that user maybe 70 or 80% probability that he really did read that article. So going to the next slide, I want to mention that there are many more variants of how to use these data technicals in combinations. And the most important, why I think technicals is important, because say you may implement everything and then concentrate on Google Analytics, but if your technicals is weak point, you may get false positive, false negative results in your analytics. Say if you the most frequent thing that I've faced with when publishers track buy now events, like buy now button, they track button click itself, but not the actual purchase. And this is one of the cases when you may get false positive results. So it is better to check and make QAing of your tags, of your data that you're passing, like monthly or every half a year, because anyway, things may change on your user interface. So let's go to the next slide, and I believe this is acting on data. Pass to Vasily.
Thank you so much, Almas. This is a cool presentation on the importance and the hardship of establishing the, or rather working on the technical side of the things. Maybe just to reiterate for a couple of minutes on what Almas presented to you is probably two takeaways for myself, at least in terms of like how we worked with the publishers team. First is we couldn't do all the technical work from our end as an analytics provider or as a data consultant. We would need to closely collaborate with the technical teams of the publishers, because there are some backend systems, as Almas mentions, that needs to pass this data for us so we can grab it and push it to your Google Analytics, and then you can derive your insights on this data. So there were a lot of back and forth between us and the technical teams, and that was, I would say, the vast majority of the project or the time that we spent in this project. And another point that I would want to emphasize here again is the complexity of this work, right? So different publishers would use different software, and the technicals would depend on the software. Different publishers would have their own user interface and their own features, such as infinite scroll and other features, which we would need to take into account and make sure we're tracking on all these features right. Because simply as what Almas has mentioned before, out of the box Google Analytics solution won't work that well for you. You would want to make sure that you're collecting these data points at the right time, such as like article completion time or the subscription events that again Almas has mentioned, right? Importance of doing the technicals right, it's realized by the publishers when they actually try to look into the data and they see some sort of odd moments, right? Then they would ask us like, what is happening? Why are we seeing this information, these numbers not matching back to our, let's say, subscription platform? We would look into it, we would advise on how to approach these data points, and we would help to establish the tags for them in order to make sure that we're collecting the right amount of the subscriptions. We're collecting the article reading completion at the right time, where people are actually reaching for the button, for example, without scrolling through it in a second. So there are a lot of these smaller technical points that it's crucial to get them all right. And again, this was one of the biggest parts of our participation in the project, if I may say so. But right now, what I want to talk about with you again, and that's going to be me again, is how to act on this data. Because likely myself, Jakub, Almas, Meruyert, and some other people on the call would appreciate this technical, nerdy stuff. But I know that most people who are on this call, they're probably asking themselves, all right, so once these data points are collected, the technologist has its work done. So what we can do with these data points, right? Because not every publisher is technically savvy, and not every company in the region or in the world are technically savvy in using the data. So this is a process, right? So what I want to do now is I want to give a little bit of examples on how you can act on these data points that we help the publishers to collect. So before I get into this, I previously mentioned that there are some steps that can be taken towards data-driven diffusion. Again, each publisher would has its own digital maturity step, which this publisher is on, nascent or more mature, for example, or complete professional with its own team. So this will be the one factor. The other factor would be the business objective that publisher has. Are we focusing on subscriptions? Are we focusing on engagement or retention, and so on? So when it comes to subscription-based revenue, it's important not to miss out on the establishing the basics, right? So we start with the content. We measure how your content performs, so you can make sure that you're producing the most important, the most valuable, the most engaging content for you. Then you move to the increasing your subscribers base. And once you act on the increase of the subscriber base, you can use into retention of this subscription base. So I want to provide a framework on how to approach business objective through the data. I know I presented it before in the beginning of the slides, but for those who may want to, let's say, refresh it, I would present it from a slightly different perspective. So again, we start with identifying the business goal, right? So we want to start with something specific. We don't want to take all the things into one place because it never ends up well. I mean, people are getting frustrated, teams are getting frustrated by the amount of data-related tasks you're throwing them. So we want to make sure that we select the most important business goal for us as a publisher. Then once we have this business goal established, we pin down the KPIs. So there are a lot of things that we can do in terms of engaging readers more, or there are a lot of approaches we can take on how to grow the subscription base. But yet, again, we advise on focusing on specific points and specific KPIs here. And I will show you an examples, or at least like the KPIs that we share from the experience that we have in the publisher spaces, again, as a data consultancy company. Once you've done with the identification of the business goals, you pin down the KPIs related to the specific goals. specific business goals, you need to make sure that the data foundation are in place again. And the story is simple here. For the 8 publishers that were in this cohort, it's done. So the data foundations are established. So this is checked by, again, by MightyHive. And the 4th step, which may be the most complex in my opinion, my experience, is to kick off the analysis practices and experiments. Again, us, MightyHive, Almaz, we're talking a lot about the complexity of the technical work, and it takes a lot of time, and we need to collaborate between the technical teams like ourselves, the publisher, technical teams, developers, to make sure it's right. And this is truly complex and serious work that was carried out. But in my experience, this may not be enough, and the main complexity could actually lie into establishing analysis and practices experiments in the organization. This is something that we usually relate to the change management. Why it's hard? Because people don't like changes in general. I mean, and that's understandable, right? So if you have your editorial team that is working with the content in the way that they feel is working for them, coming up with a new solution, coming up with a new data-driven approach could be a little bit of a burdensome for them. So this process is complex on its own. What I want to say here is it will definitely take some time to adopt these data-driven practices. So there are a couple of other frameworks that can be utilized in order to grow the digital maturity of the organization. But what I want to say is, like, once you have everything in place, business goals, KPIs, data foundations in place, there will be some work with the teams in order to figure out how to approach the data, where to look at, which dimensions, which metrics exactly, which reports, how then to make decisions based on this combination of data points, and establishing the cadence. So doing this regularly, and establishing the process of like reiteration loop. And Meruyert is going to be taking you through these points. So now to the actual examples. Again, in this presentation, I mentioned that there are 3 main business goals that we identified in the course of the project for the variety of the publishers in the project. Again, it's engagement of the readers, it's monetization / growing your subscribers base, and this is retention once you have your subscriber base established. So I'm gonna provide you a couple of examples of the KPIs related to each of those 3 business objectives, and I'm gonna give you an example of the actual measurements, like the technical measurements that you can take from the Google Analytics and act upon. Some of these measurements are available in Google Analytics by default. Some of these measurements require the work that we've done for the cohort of these publishers. So engaging your readers, the main 4 KPIs that we see or we suggest from the experience that we have in the publisher space is growing your brand lovers. And I'm gonna spend a little bit more time on explaining the brand lovers concept because it's actually quite technical. I believe that most of you would be familiar with this one, but I'll still take a couple of minutes to explain about this one. So growing brand lovers, increasing newsletter subscriptions as a proxy of the further engagement, improving engagement via those newsletter subscriptions, and increasing logged-in database. So when you look into the growing your brand lovers is a specific segment of the users. And again, I have a couple of more slides. I will go through more details in a minute. You want to basically grow this specific segment of the users. You want to look in how many page views these users produce for you, and you want to look into like how big is the segment on its own. And you want to look into the best performing content for this group and the worst performing content for this group. Why is it important? Because just looking into overall content performance doesn't give you that much power or rather business leverage, because actually you hear more about the users that bring you or the readers that bring you the most revenue, and that's the brand lovers. So this is one of the approaches. You look into the growth of this segment, you look into the number of the page views for specific content that this segment consume, and you look into other metric for the content, which is recirculation rate, which means like if I go through one page, through one article, for example, if this article triggers me to go through some other content piece on your website, if it's engaging in this way. So this is another important metric that I wouldn't say always, but sometimes overlooked by the publishers. Then if we go to the second KPI here, increase in newsletter subscriptions. Again, your newsletter is a proxy in terms of engaging, and it could be considered as a bridge for further paid subscription. You want to look into the number of newsletter subscription events. Side note, this is something that should be implemented, and this is something that we worked on with the publishers. It doesn't appear like in Google Analytics out of the blue or by default. And you want to establish a goal based on this event, and you want to look into the goal conversion rate for your newsletter subscriptions. And then obviously you can use all those data points that Almas mentioned in his presentation, and you can combine these data points to, let's say, answer to the questions, when should I be sending out my newsletter so it performs the best? Should it be late afternoon? Should it be early morning? Then you can look into the content that you're putting into this newsletter and how this content perform. And this is to this third KPI here, improving engagement via newsletter. So once you set up your newsletter, you're sending it out to your readers, you want to see how do they react. So they go to the first page, for example, to the article that is stated in the newsletter, and they land on it, but do they actually go further into some other content pieces that you have on your website? Or maybe should you consider other pieces of the content to provide them with a newsletter? Should it be horoscope or should it be political news? It's a question, right? And this is a starting point. Your KPI, your measurement, and then there would be some practice that you would establish based on your model, again, and different angles on how to look into the data. And the fourth KPI here is increasing of your logged-in reader base. This is somewhat similar to getting people to subscribe to the newsletters, simply because people who take a step further to log in into your platform, you actually moving them towards your loyal base. All right, then we have second business goal, which is conversion and monetization, and this is directly related to the subscriptions. And I'm gonna glance through it. Once again, fear not, if you have any further questions, you can put them into the Q&A session, and this presentation will be also shared with you by WAN-IFRA. So 4 KPIs that I would mention here is actually growing your subscription base. So basically number of the users that are subscribed, or percentage of the subscribed users versus non-subscribed users, or versus all users. Increment in paid subscribers. So for the publishers that provide both paid and free subscription, essentially you want everyone to subscribe, but at some point you want to move free subscribers to the paid cohort. Second one is improving your meter stop rate. Here we're talking about paywalled articles. So a free user is facing a paywall. What you want to this reader to do is not to close your website and go do something else. You want this reader to actually explore some options, right? So then it comes to some experimentations with your offer. And increasing paywall efficiency is also related to the same thing that I just mentioned. You just want people to start exploring the different options. And again, if you want to, if you feel like you're mature enough in terms of how you utilize the data, you can put more context into these actions. You can actually do it per different segment of users and so on. And the third business goal here is, again, once the content engagement and monetization are established, you're looking into retaining your subscriber base. So 2 things that you would want to do: improving your subscribers engagement. So you make sure that these people, they don't just pay money and they stop visiting your website, or they're like rarely read it, because at some point they may unsubscribe. you want them to be engaged with the content, and you want to make sure that you're producing and recommending them the right content. And the second one is maximizing lifetime value of your subscriber base and decreasing their churn, which is also like interrelated. So you want them to resubscribe. I have a couple of examples here, which are related to specific steps that you can take with these data points in Google Analytics, how to create a segment of brand lovers, how to create a report of content engagement, and how to look into this data. So I'm not gonna give all the details here. Again, this will be shared with you so you can properly read through this example if that's something that interested you. But in general, you identify your brand lover segment. I'm gonna give you an example just in a bit. You look into the content only for this segment because it's the most valuable segment for you in terms of how this content performs. Your top performing content in terms of page use and recirculation rate is something that you want to produce more and more for the rest of your reader base. That's the content that keeps your most valuable readers engaged. On the opposite side, you want to look at the bottom content for the same group, for the brand lovers, and stop producing this content. Because this bottom content may be performing pretty okay for everyone, but you don't care that much about everyone, you care about the brand lovers. And a couple of words about the brand lovers for those who are not familiar with you. Again, I mentioned that for publishers, it's important not just to increase the volume of the traffic, it's important to focus on this specific segment of the brand lovers. Brand lovers is defined by recency, frequency, volume framework, which means these are the people who visit your website very frequently. They visited your website recently, so you're not looking into past engaged users or past brand lovers, but there are some ones who visited your website yesterday and they visited it the day before. And they, in each of their visits, they typically go through the several articles. So they go through several content pieces. So they engage with your content. For each of the publisher, this definition would be slightly different. So you can experiment with the data, like what is your threshold for the brand lovers definition. But the main point here, what I want to emphasize again is scientific studies, so actual data analysis showed that one brand lover is worth 50 one-time visitors in terms of like the amount of the revenue these people bring, right? This is to the point that you don't want to just increase the number of the volume of your traffic on the website, but you want to focus on this specific segment, see who they are, and grow this segment. And that's how you increase your revenue, essentially. And spoiler alert, your brand lovers have the highest proximity to become your subscribers in the future. That's why I'm spending quite a lot of time explaining this context for those who may be new to it. This is the playbook that describes the approach to the concept of the brand lovers. You can download it either now or we will show this once again. It has much more details about it. There are a couple of more examples. I will glance through it just in order to give more time to like other sections that we will be covering. So the second business objective is about conversion and monetization. The example that we provide here is how to look into the content that brought you a subscriber. So what pieces of the content made me subscribe in the same website visit today, for example. Relatively straightforward again. And the third approach here, also related to the conversion and monetization, is to how to look or how to increase your paywall efficiency. So you want to calculate or you want to measure how many people in how many instances are presented with different paywalls and different offers, and how they react to it initially. So if they click through a specific offer, even before they make up their decision to subscribe. Why is it important? And why is it important at the same time as just looking into how your plans perform in terms of like the transactions that you see, is because you want to experiment with these click-through rates for your offer for different segments of readers, right? Because different offers can work better or worse for different segments of users. And again, all these things that I'm explaining right now. You can read about those in the deck that we'll be sharing, but most of them require this data foundation in place. That's why we speak a lot about this and pay quite a lot of attention into the technicals. All right, so I'm gonna pass my time to Meruyert, who is gonna be speaking about making analysis a recurring practice. So I kind of gave an example on how to do it on ad hoc basis, or like some starting points, and she would be speaking more about the overall approach or the mindset in terms of optimization and data analysis.
Thank you, Vas. My name is Meruyert, and I am analytics specialist in MightyHive. So in this project, I had a role in performing a technical audit and designing data collection planning. And we also developed a playbook about testing and optimization for publishers, which I will talk about in the next few slides. As the part of the process of achieving those business objectives that we've been talking about, it is important to constantly improve readers' experience on your website. In order to do so, you have to use your analytics experience and optimization as tightly interconnected tools. So that you can use the data foundation that you have established to analyze existing users' experience, to get the insights from that, and you can use those insights to turn them into opportunities for improvement. So after you have identified those opportunities for improvement, then you can proceed to the optimization process. So the actions that you take from the optimization process then will be generating more insights in the analytics, so that it will create the loop, as you can see on the picture on the slide. The insights from analysis driving experimentation, and the data from experimentation is feeding back into the analytics cycle. So this is how it works. And to the next slide, please. So for successful optimization on your website requires very clear planning. So apart from having the experiments to be tested, you should also consider what business objectives are being met, how the change is intended to impact the reader, and how you will be measuring the success. So this table here provides a framework for your experimentation program. The first step, which is strategy and planning step, here you will need to identify the objectives to ensure that every test that you design is targeted towards success of your business goals. And once you have identified your business goals, then you can start the ideation process. Ideation is the process of generating the ideas for experimentation. And once you have the list of experiments that you want to test, you will need to score each of these experiments in order to prioritize them. And the next step is measurement. In this step, you will need to define your metrics for success. And in test design and deployment stage, you will actually design the experiment, you will describe the test variants that you're gonna have, and you will decide on where, when, and how you're gonna run the tests. And the last step is analysis and evaluation, where you analyze the results of the test, you will evaluate the experiment outcomes, and it will also include reviewing whether your metrics are statistically significant. So clearly defining each of these components before launching the test ensures that the experiments are prioritized, measured, and designed in the way that it will drive the maximum impact to your business goals. To the next slide, please. So next slides shows the examples for experiments ideas related to each type of business goals, and the test hypothesis based on those business goals. So when you create the ideas for experiment, test hypothesis will help you clarify the optimization, the impact that it will have to the user, and how the success will be measured, which is very important to identify. And for designing the test hypothesis, you can use the if-then leading to framework. The examples are on the slide. For the first example, the experimentation idea that we have is personalizing content based on browsing data, location, device, etc. So here you will have the change that you're gonna make is having a variant where the content is personalized to the reader based on their location, whether it's the device or their browsing data, and how it will affect the user is the reader will be more likely to be engaged with the articles that you recommend because they will be more interested in the topic. And you can measure the success of this experiment by measuring the engagement rates of the readers. And another example, to the previous slide, please, yeah. Another example is adding a newsletter banner to top of every article. So in this experimentation, you will have the variant where user will see the newsletter banner on the top of every article they read, so that they will have more chances to sign up for the newsletter. And you will measure the success of this experiment by measuring the subscription rate to the newsletter. To the next slide, please. And here also we have the experimentation ideas for another business goal, which is converting and monetizing. So for example, if you have the experiment to communicate more benefits directly on subscription page, so the changes that you will be making is having benefits such as exclusive content to included on the subscription page, so that readers will be more enticed to subscribe for the access to such content. And you will measure it through measuring the subscription rates. And another idea is to establish locked content strategy and introducing the hardware, so that the people that are interested in some content, they will be also enticed to subscribe in order to read the content if they are interested in this particular topic. So the change that you will be making will be introducing the hard wall, and users will be more likely to register in order to read this article, and you will measure the registration rate as well. And the next slide, please. So for the business goal, which is retaining another business goal, the experimentation idea that we have here is setting up 30, 60, 90-day customer onboarding program. This might be like a welcome letter or letters from editor that will keep users to come back and retain users, so that the change that you will be making is like engaging users through the onboarding program, introducing the onboarding program, and how it will promote users to continuously engage with your website, with the brand. And the metric that you will be measuring is the retention rate. So we have more examples and ideas in the playbook that we have developed. And at this step of the framework, you will identify the list of experimentation ideas for each of your business goals. And once you have this list of experiments, you can proceed to the next steps of optimization process, which is prioritizing the ideas, defining the metrics, designing the experiment, and analyzing the result. And it is very important to continue the process once an experiment is over. Whether the variant wins or loses, the next step is to activate the data that you have as the result from the experiment. You can activate it through either implementing the optimization if the experiment was successful, or you can share the learnings that you get from the experiment. So with this saying, I will pass it over to Jakub. He will take you through the results section.
Amazing. Thank you, Meruyert. Thank you, team, for this amazing presentation. This is the last chapter. Just a couple of minutes to present that investing in data pays off. I think that's the main message from this whole presentation. This investment in foundation is not easy. It requires coordination across multiple parties in your organization, but there is a payoff. Vasily, if you could switch to the next slide. Yeah, so in terms of results, what we wanted to present, because these are the most astonishing results for this particular stream of work, these were, I would say, the most of the credit or all of the credit I will pass to Google and FTI. I would not dare to claim anything from that, and it's well described in the playbook. Another slide, another QR code in the bottom. So going through these, we can start to see that testing framework and having a thesis and looking after like even minor changes can lift up your revenue. So that's, we have Business Insider Japan. We have a couple of other really smart things like testing different plans, testing terms of this plan. So for how long they're valid, they can bring quite big differences to your organizations in terms of the revenue from subscriptions. And if you are going to take anything from today's presentation, please take this. Have a test. Have a thesis that something may work better than your current situation and try to implement that test. Split 50-50, 20-80, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you test things. So these are really good results, as you can see, because if we have 2 digits numbers in terms of improvement in revenue, you can get your baseline today and you can calculate how much of ROI you potentially get from this kind of projects almost straight away. And some of these can be executed in-house without using external parties. Most of you guys have already some capabilities in that space. If you don't, you can reach out to us or to Google, and there potentially is a way to get a support from us. Moving to the next slide, to talk a little bit of what we've done as MightyHive. That's a Data Labs result, so not that much focused on the concept of subscriptions. But the truth is, if you want to get the subscriptions, is best when you sorted out the content planning and the RFV, which goes with this brand lover concept, which Vasily was explaining. And that was the milestone, the first milestone for Jagran. And you can see that the increase in completion rates, increase in recirculation for brand lovers, which drives later on growing brand lovers. That was work executed by Google, GNI Data Labs program, together with MightyHive and a local partner in India called Tatfik. So there were 3 parties included working with Jagran New Media to deliver that. A piece of really good work, which proves that investments in data pays off. On the next slide, we have another case study that is from New Zealand and NZME, where there was an investment in a second use case from Deloitte case study, which is the recirculation. So that was building a bespoke and recirculation engine, which delivered really good results and helped NZME to achieve really good goals in keeping their audience on a side, as they were using one of these recommendations engines, which sometimes was sending people to other publishers. And And also it increased the speed of the site because the recommendations could be delivered faster. And there is quite a lot of thinking how this content engine could be customized. That was delivered under Data Labs, so funded by Google. MightyHive was engaging as a strategist, and then Datalicious delivered the technical implementation. And these days, Datalicious is also part of MightyHive as we merged together a few months back. So this shows amazing results. With this, I can say just thank you for listening to us today. We are super soon to have you as an audience today. These are our details if you would like to find us later on and have a chat. And with that, I will move to the last slide to give you the last chance to click the QR codes and download all of these playbooks we've mentioned during this presentation. And I will pass to Juni, who will open our Q&A session. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jakub, Vasily, Meruyert, and Almas, for that great presentation. I really enjoyed the very meticulous attention to the structured and methodological approach that you have actually prescribed here. I'd highly recommend you download these playbooks. These will also be included in the deck that will be kindly shared by MightyHive later. So you will get a copy of this deck as well as these QR codes. I've looked at some of these reports and playbooks myself. They're excellent. So MightyHive's Data Labs book, of course, documents the journey and the approach taken by the participants of the Data Lab, which started in 2018 and went into 2019. The prelude to that actually is the digital transformation report by Deloitte, and that is kind of like the starting point of that whole data structure and journey approach. Data maturity in APAC region is actually at its nascency. So, you know, we all have a very long way to go in the context of the media, the news media industry. It does give us a very broad overview as to where things are and, you know, the potential and what can be. So that's a good starting point. And then, of course, the subscriptions lab, which ran for the first time in the APAC region by FTI and Google, is also available for download now. This was also featured in our Asian Media Leaders Summit recently. So please help yourselves to them, and they're free for your download. So maybe we could take down these slides and invite the speakers back for Q&A now. We're of course, please, curious to hear your questions, or even, maybe if you have a comment or an observation, or perhaps an experience you wish to share. But maybe I can sort of kick things off. We have a few minutes to go, maybe about 10-15 minutes to go. So I'd like to maybe start off, because it's a huge topic, and news organizations, and especially traditional media companies, are of course very much used to working in their various departments and kind of like silos. But of course, these days the access to data and the technology behind it actually give us a way to look at the helicopter perspective, the 360 view of data across organizations. I'm just curious, because I know MightyHive works across many industries as well. What are some of the industry use cases or situations that are sort of mirror the media companies or the media industry's journey? Maybe if something comes to mind that you can maybe give us sort of the way they have grown, or they have started putting into place the data foundations and using data to great effect.
Take this one. That the data is becoming more and more important in a digital space, and also with, I would say, seeing that the third-party cookie is fading out. That's a big game changer recently, and that's something which is affecting all of the businesses along the way, and that requires a significant thought power, I would say, to adjust, and that adjustment needs to happen on both sides. So I'm talking about advertisers, which are understood as a buy side, and also on the sell side, which is publishers, so investing more in the first-party data. I think it's a great opportunity for publishers to invest in the first-party data, because That means leverage in the moment where the DMPs are no longer a thing, so you can monetize better that data. So it's actually very tight with the dollars from advertising, and also investing in the first-party data to increase lifetime value of your subscribers and increase that lifespan of the subscribers is, I would say, pretty important, if not critical, for your businesses. So everything starts to be more and more tied up, and that data becomes almost like an oxygen for us. So it's something which everyone needs to pay attention to it.
Yeah, definitely the cookies expire next year, right? So everyone's kind of like scrambling around now to quickly put all those processes in place. But looking outside the media industry, outside advertising, are there other sort of industries that we could maybe take a cue from, or are worth sort of emulating in terms of their use of their transformation and the use of data?
Yeah, great. I think one of the environment which is worth to follow is any sort of mobile apps. There is quite a lot of analysis in terms of how users are using these apps. Also, there is a massive decay in terms of like life. So we see decreasing number of users very quickly, which is very similar to what publishers may experience often, that these users don't come back. So there is quite a lot of research into that area. Then the second part, maybe not that industry related, but overall is a personalization and real-time personalization. So this means, how do we react to the fact that I read 3 articles about certain topic, how this impacts my content recommendations, my newsletters, etc. So marketing automations and stuff like that, which actually works pretty well across most of the buy side, regardless of the industry. In terms of that real-time personalization, I think pretty visual use cases around automotive and travel. There is few case studies out there which are worth, I would say, studying and using as some sort of an inspiration. That's where I think I will draw the attention of audience.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, automotive and travel have just grown by leaps and bounds and transformed so well and adapted to the situation. A lot of questions. Last year we had a conversation, a small closed-door conversation with publishers, and then the question arose. Sort of data has traditionally been something like, your editor, one of your editors would sort of open the dashboard and start looking, and then it sort of grew out of that. So, well, how are we doing today? How many users? How many page views? How many clicks? And so on. And then maybe the community manager, maybe somebody came in and said, okay, I'm managing the community now. How much engagement am I getting? And all that. And then of course we come to a stage where we got to start building a data team. How do we even start for those who have not even got a good data team in place, or even hired, or even started hiring? So one of the questions lastly that came out of this closed-door conversation was, how do I even specify or write a job description or something like this? Do I hire a data scientist? Do I hire a data analyst? And then Meruyert's examples of experimentation and optimization. This is a full-time job for quite a few people. So what is your advice as to how to even start building this foundational team?
Great. Definitely don't start with hiring a data scientist. This is the last piece of the equation. So please don't start with data scientists. They come last to this equation. You can try to look for people who understand the MarTech, and I would say the MarTech understanding in terms of tagging. This whole presentation today was around tagging. So how do we create tags? How do we put them? How do we send them to the database, which in that case was mostly Google Analytics? And then an analyst, which is a little bit trickier to find on the market, a good analyst, but also you can take a shortcut and employ a partner, a local partner who understands the technology of choice. And that could be a good starting point. If you have a partner like MightyHive or anyone from the Google's ecosystem, these people will be more than capable to help you to write good JDs. They will be more than capable to up-train your specialists once you hire them. If you don't find a perfect match on the market, they will help you to make them a perfect match, so they can provide all of the trainings which these people require. And then you can start building your team. And overall, I would say it's good to have a partner around who understands the publishing business and understands the use cases and knows how to help you to drive your maturity. It's maybe not the most expensive, not the most cost-efficient way, but it's definitely the fastest way to build things. So if from all the things in your business you value speed to the market, then definitely going through partners is a good idea. If you want to build a team in-house, that may take a little bit more of time, but will be equally rewarding, I would say, from ROI perspective.
With the partners that, the publishers that you've worked with, where does such a team sit? Does it sit in the newsroom? Does it sit in the business side? Does it sit in the IT? You know, this is a team that really straddles across different, previously data silos.
They see, we saw all of the setups. I've never seen them very correlated with editorial team, unfortunately. But we saw deployments where the data team provides a lot of tools to the editorial. And I think a close relationship between editorial and data is very, very required in today's organizations. And I would say the data team should be really far from the typical IT, because then they will be too focused on very technical aspects on these things. And the more exposure they have to a wider business, the better. And if they can sit between, I would say, sales and yield and AdOps and editorial team, and they can try to connect the two, maintaining the independence of parties, obviously, I think that the better benefits for the organization.
I think you gave a great starting point for us to consider whether it's engagement you want to measure, whether it's conversion or monetization or retention. I think these are excellent starting points for those who really are trying to decide which one to prioritize. And I think you've given us a lot of great guidance. I think the KPIs that you were spelt out so clearly are incredibly useful as well for each of these various aspects and of decision making, and engagement. What are some of these? Maybe if you could give us an idea of these dashboards. How do they look like? You know, and what sort of data should be on them, and whether it's across the different departments. How you know, what does it look like really?
Yeah. I think the great starting point is actually RCI tool, which is available for free on the Google News Initiative. It gives you like just a high level glance of what you should be doing overall, and I think which explains the performance of articles and defining these metrics which are important for performance of articles. So like a rate of people who finished reading the article, so anything related to the scroll tracking, number of page views, obviously, but also number of page views by a particular segment of people, as Vasily mentioned, the brand lovers, because this is the most important part of the group. If we think from, I would say, monetization perspective, I think all the metrics which are related to viewability and overall quality, because that measurement of quality is very hard to get, I would say, in just programmatic way. So that's where publishers have an advantage over, I would say, any random website in the internet, is that you can, through the deals, guarantee the viewability for me. And that's something which you should be very vocal about. And you have an inventory which is well structured, and you can tell me what part of an inventory I'm going to get when I do deals with you. So these are the things which are worth taking care of. And I would say the whole ecosystem, regardless of the tech stack you are using these days, should give you an opportunity to feature these to different users, and this should be definitely maintained. My last comment in terms of the dashboards, I think equally as you look what you do well, you should also look very deeply into the things which don't work, and you should stop doing things which don't work well for you. And this is the part which is very controversial in most of the newsrooms, the articles which we spent a lot of time writing, and they didn't get any, I would say, traction, even through promotion on the homepage. these are the most valuable lessons you can get from these dashboards. This is something which you should dive in because it will save you time, and you could invest this time in slightly different topic or a different format of an article. Maybe there is a common theme why these articles don't work, and that can help driving business further. And I think that's the lowest hanging fruit here to stop doing certain things.
I think that's such great advice. I think we see obviously the shift from content-centric to audience-centric. You have to get that data back from the audience. What are they telling you by their clicks and by their eyeballs? We have one question here from Ren in Cambodia. He's interested, or she's interested in the session, and the question is, how is the brand level analytics on Google Tools, or whether it's analytics or tags, the GTM, what properties should be identified? I think this goes to the definition of brand levels.
So basically, Google Analytics has the feature called segments, and you can build a segment which more or less simulates the concept of a brand lover. So it's basically you can add a filter for a number of sessions. So in the last 30 days, you can say people who visited me at least, let's say 45 times. So this means that on average, they have 1.5 sessions a day. And let's say they had more than 50 page views. So this means that every of these sessions had more than one page view. You can play around with these numbers. There are different approaches in terms of setting these brackets, but that's the easiest way to get a fair feeling of your brand lovers on a site. If you want to go with the full RFV, which stands for recency, frequency, volume, then you should use raw data, which is either available through GA4 or through Google Analytics 360, which is the paid product. And then in BigQuery, you can calculate in a very specific way, like all of these brackets. So how many days passed since last visit, what was the frequency of these visits, and what volume we had. And you can focus not only on page views, but let's say on article views, which is even better than just page views. So this is a very quick sort of run through it. And I highly encourage an experimentation with these metrics and playing around with segments and Google Analytics, even if you're using free version, even if you have sampling issues or whatever, just keep playing around and develop thinking around that particular small part of your audience.
Is there an industry-wide definition for brand lovers?
I will not call it definition-wide, but industry-wide, but we have a definition for brand lovers in our playbooks where we provided all of the values for these equations. And I think these are a good ones to start with, but obviously every publisher may have a slightly different approach and considerations. But I think the ones we have in the playbook are a good starting point.
Just one quick last question. You mentioned there was some mention earlier about conversion events and subscription events. What exactly do you define as event?
So the event basically means interaction with a website. So an event can be a paywall popped up. That's a number of pop-ups of paywalls is a great indicator. The click-through rate through the paywall. So you displayed me an offer, how many people actually went to the details of that offer or went through a checkout. So the checkout steps are again a series of events, then a purchase button or actual purchase is another event. So that builds you a typical funnel. So you see you have readers, then you have your brand lovers, and then you have people, if you use Matter system, then you have number of people who hit the paywall, right? And then you have the steps through that paywall, and then you can play around with widening the funnel and narrowing it down later on to manage the numbers. And experimentation with this paywall will give you more events basically, because you will have an event for a presentation of a version A of a paywall or a version B. And then per version, you have different CTRs, which indicates actually which of these are more successful for your business.
Yeah, so I guess the moral of the story is just experiment, because that's and dare to fail, and we always learn from whether things work or don't work. So with
exactly.
that, Thank you so much to our great panel from MightyHive, Jakub, Vasily, Almas, and Meruyert for this very informative session. And I hope it has inspired everyone here to start taking that plunge if you haven't done so already, or encourage your other colleagues as well to come aboard, because I think it's a great framework, a great structured approach to start with if they're looking for somewhere to begin. And with that, I think I'd like to thank the panel. And then for this session today, it is, after all, Data Foundations harnessing the power of data to drive content, product, and subscription strategy. Thank you for attending, and it is brought to you by the Google News Initiative.